Good afternoon.
Hello.
Today is February 1st, 2018. My name is Helene Tischler. I'm here at the Newton City Hall Law Library with Alfreda Piecuch, who has graciously agreed to be part of Newton Talks Oral History Project, and that's conducted with the Newton Free Library, Historic Newton, and the Newton Senior Center. Thank you so much for being with us, Alfreda.
I am pleased to participate.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about where you're from, when you came to Newton, maybe how you chose, or the United States, and then coming here? Please let us begin.
It's a long and complicated story, actually. So, my dad was actually born in the United States. Three of my grandparents had been here to work in the factories in Manchester, New Hampshire, and all of them went back to Poland.
What years was that?
It would have been in 1920 that my grandparents returned with my father and two siblings.
Right.
And they returned to Poland because my grandfather had come down with the flu and nearly died of it, and was so upset and so scared of sort of like continuing living in tenements that he gathered his family and took them back to Poland. My father retained his citizenship, and after the World War II,
right,
in 1947, he was able to return to the United States. My mother, I was born in 1943. My mother and I were expecting to follow him pretty directly,
yes,
perhaps 6 months later or so, as was happening with other families in this kind of a situation or this
sure,
kind of a setup.
Sure.
For whatever reason, it may have been just, I don't know, envy, political move on somebody's part, that we were not able, my mother and I were not able to get a passport.
Yeah.
My father had a visa for us, but we were not able to get a passports. So we remained in Poland for 9.5 years. So I knew my father up to age 4.5, and then didn't sort of reunite with him until I was 13.5.
What a difference.
Yes.
Now, what part of Poland were you?
This is southern Poland, sort of eastern, southeast of Poland. So
what
2 hours.
Town or city?
It's a tiny village that does not, whose name does not exist anymore.
Really?
I actually wrote a book about
yes,
of the history of it and so forth.
What was the name of the
Biatkówka. Biatkówka.
I may have even heard of it.
Yes, it is now united with two other villages, and has adopted the name of one of them, Moderówka.
Okay.
So.
And was there a larger city near you? What was the one closest?
Not so very close, particularly given that it was a matter of reaching either city, by wagon, at the time.
Right.
I mean, or maybe bicycle or something like that.
Wow.
So we're talking, right after the war.
Right.
It was my. I don't know if I should be talking so much about this or just.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
We want to hear where you're from.
Yes.
What that experience was like when you first learned English, when you came, what the experience was
Yes.
like leaving your country and so forth. Sure.
Sure,
The background's really important. Absolutely.
Okay, well, I did not know a word of English when I came, not even a hello.
And you were a teenager then.
And I was a teenager. It was a very difficult transition, as you can imagine. I was coming from, this tiny village, up in the sort of hills.
Yes.
And, had never no had an orange once. I had never had a banana.
Right.
You know,
And it didn't grow there?
It didn't grow there.
Nobody brought
yes,
it in.
Yes. You know, there was a lot to get used to. I had very long hair braided, you know, braids that I could sit on.
Right.
When I came here, the style was these, you know, curly bobs or whatever, you know. So I was really out of place. You know, living on a farm with livestock all around and everything. I mean, this was common at the time. You know, there would be, you know, chickens sort of
Sure.
In the hallway of the house.
Right.
You know, there was no bathrooms as such. There were outhouses. You know, taking baths was not something that was you know, done very often.
You didn't have running water in the
we
house.
didn't
You
have
had
running.
to bring the water.
Yes, we had a well, and so I remember when I started school here, you know, other kids didn't really want to sort of like pair up with me because. You know, because I looked a little odd and I probably smelled somewhat. You know, one of the first things that was that we lived in an apartment house that the owner of the house gave me as a present was now I'm having a senior moment, was you know,
Perfume or
no,
deodorant?
underarm deodorant.
Deodorant. Oh my goodness.
Underarm deodorant.
Oh, just a little message there.
Yes.
Was that here in Newton, or where did you
No,
come
it was
when
in
you first?
Manchester, New Hampshire.
So when
Yes.
you first arrived, it was
Yes.
Manchester.
True. Yes.
Ah.
My father had been born in Manchester and
Right.
he returned to Manchester. My father in Poland learned a trade. He was a wheelwright.
Right.
Yes. He had also gone to school, you know, beyond what, you know, was the usual sort of level of education.
Yes.
And
he did
you
that
know,
here or
but
in Poland?
He did that in Poland.
In Poland, when he
Yes.
went back.
Yes.
Right.
But when he came here, I mean, there was you know, the opportunities for, you know, he himself did not speak English, obviously.
Right.
You know, because you know, leaving at 3, he probably was just interacting with his family.
Sure.
And in Poland, he didn't have access to English.
So your parents did not speak English when they came?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No.
And you too, you were starting from
Yes,
scratch.
well, so as I had mentioned, my father came here, you know, 9 years ahead of us.
Yes.
And, you know, eventually, with the change in, with a sort of like a shake-up in government,
Yes.
a Gomulka who came from our region, and I guess there were some people that my family made connections with,
Right.
you know, to maybe, you know, sort of like swing or in some fashion, perhaps pay money, you know, in order to eventually get that passport to be able for us to leave. So.
Yes.
But I'm going back and forth.
No, but
here.
that's fine because life is like that. So what was it like really arriving, and then how long were you in Manchester?
Well, I was in Manchester throughout, well, when I came here, I was put in, my father actually went to the school administration to sort of get guidance as to where I should be placed in school, given that I was already, you know, 13 and a half, and I did not know any English. So they suggested actually that I be put in a parochial school, in a Catholic parochial school, which was where the nuns were
Polish.
Were Polish,
And they
yes.
were bilingual.
And they were bilingual, yes.
Ah.
Most of the students were not bilingual, but the nuns were. And so I sort of congratulate myself in that one of the first things that I asked, to have translated into English was, speak English to me. And so, because I really very much did not want to have only factory work as my future.
Right.
And all the people around me, my father was working in a factory, all his friends were working in a factory. I wanted to be able to continue with school. I had always imagined myself in Poland, that I would be going farther to school. And actually my cousins who were more or less my age are pretty educated. My one of them she is now retired, but she had been a judge in Poland. So
wow.
So there was opportunities.
Educated.
Even
yes.
though these villages were out of the way,
yes,
education was free under
yes.
the communist system,
right.
And you could really move ahead.
And many women
yes.
did.
Yes.
Not always
yes.
here.
Yes.
So you learned English with the nuns at the Catholic school.
Yes, yes.
And
yes,
were there
so,
other immigrants, other Polish students,
or
were you the only
no,
one?
I was pretty much the only one. And the way that I was learning English was really interesting in that I was put in first grade to learn to read, and reading was really a challenge. Yes. Because in the English system, obviously, the letters don't make sense necessarily, and so I remember the very first word that sort of like broke the mystery for me was the word John. John, for whatever reason, I just remember myself looking at it and then just saying something, saying anything, and it was right. And so after
so
that
must have been exciting.
Yes, well, I began taking chances,
right, right.
and maybe not feeling so self-conscious because this. Just sort of like closing my eyes and, well, not quite closing my eyes, but just jumping into it, did it.
Yes.
So
yes, you're right.
So
English doesn't make sense very
so
often.
It took. I was attending the elementary school, St. Casimir's Catholic School in Manchester, for a year and a half. I was so as much trouble as I was having with English. I was not having trouble with math. Our math was more advanced
yes.
in Poland than it was here.
Yes.
So that
so that was good. You were ahead.
Yes, but people didn't like sort of like hearing that or seeing that mm-hmm. here.
Right.
Yes. Another thing that I was made to do was to learn how to write with the sort of American slant. So, here I was in 7th grade or whatever, and I would be assigned, pages and pages of letters, to copy, to switch my writing. I don't know why that was important, but
at the time, I guess handwriting was.
Yes, yes.
So how long did you stay at that school?
Well, for a year and a half,
right,
and then
okay.
I was able. I had enough English to be able to, go to start high school, and I began taking Latin, and that was incredibly important in learning English.
Yes.
All the. I was learning the two languages at the same time, practically.
Right, Latin and English.
Yes, yes.
And was it a Catholic high school?
No, No,
Okay,
it was a
that
public high
just
school.
a public
Yes.
school in Manchester,
Yes, in
New
Manchester.
Hampshire.
Yes, Central High School.
Oh.
Yes, and then so I enrolled myself in the college course,
Good for
and
you.
and when it came time to, and I had my mother's cousin was very supportive of my going to college. My parents were not interested in my going to college.
Right.
So there was that sort of struggle and discussion and everything. So I was glad to have that aunt backing me up.
Absolutely. Were you the only child?
Well, I did have a sister. When I was 15 and a half, a sister was born.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I'm so grateful for my parents for providing me with a sister. So of course, at the time that she was born, we're talking about the 50s. It was a great embarrassment, to be out with her, because obviously people would assume that she was mine, my own child. So
you're just a teenager, though.
Exactly, and I so much wanted to fit in,
right?
And
exactly.
and that certainly wouldn't be a good thing to a situation to find myself in. So
was it difficult to assimilate at that point? I mean, did you find even in the Catholic school people were not accepting of you, or what did you face there besides the English and being great at math?
Yes. So I mean, I did feel odd for some of the reasons that I mentioned. I started sort of cutting my mother was resisting. I mean, she, sort of like loved my hair. She wanted always to braid it and to arrange it on my head.
Right, that was the style.
Yes, that was the style to which she was used to back in Poland. I insisted on sort of like chopping it off bit by bit, and then came all the curlers and sleeping on them at night and everything. And my hair is very fine and very straight, so that never worked very well.
So that was a challenge.
Yes. So
that was definitely. And did your family keep most traditions from Poland? How did that work for you? And
yes.
Did you find
yes.
a community that was
well,
welcoming?
The community, the Polish community. I mean, there was other people who came here at the time that my dad did, or else, relatives that had stayed here. I mean, because when my grandparents came here to work, my grandfather, my father's father, was one of 18.
Wow.
Okay, so I mean, they were coming from hunger, and
yes.
and just aside from him, just many others in the family came here, and they most of them stayed. Some of them went back as he did, but many of them stayed. So there were those relatives here. So there was that community of relatives. There were the people that came with my father. There were the people that came from Germany who had been the work camps there, the displaced people, DPs, I guess they were called.
Camps,
yes,
right.
And many of the people were sort of unmoored and doing a lot of drinking and that sort of thing. And I did not want to partake a whole lot in that. I mean, I landed in those situations, obviously, but it's not something that I felt, akin to, or
you didn't relate to that as much.
Yes. So.
But your family kept a lot of traditions from.
Yes, like the Christmas and others. Some of them were fell by the wayside because you sort of like need a certain environment for it.
Yes, to encourage it.
Yes.
And
so
the cooking and your family traditions you pretty much
Yes, the cooking,
continue,
yes.
or
Very, very much around Christmas time, particularly. My sister, who now lives in Maine, actually, I'm going to be off on Saturday to visit with her. Sort of continue with making the pierogi and the
Yes.
kapusta and all the various
traditional
dishes. And my husband, who is not Polish, and my sons wouldn't have it any other way. So
they enjoy the
very much.
traditional.
Yes.
And you
Yeah.
do you cook that way still? Have you
Um,
become more Americanized, or do you still keep some of that?
No, I guess I've moved into, I love sort of trying new recipes and everything, and that's what I've been doing all along. But I mean, there are the, some Polish dishes that get made every so often.
Yes, for sure.
So, but certainly, around Christmas time.
Yeah, the holidays.
Now,
Yeah, and
so-
how did you eventually get to Newton? What was the path after New Hampshire?
Well, I went to college, University of New Hampshire, because it was cheap and I could get there.
Right.
And another thing that I sort of pat myself on the back about was that, given that my parents or my father was not very supportive of my going to college, I remember having sort of a big to-do with him, saying, I don't want a dowry. I want, I'd rather have some money for college. But what I did is, probably with the help of the counselors and everything, I went to banks.
Really?
Downtown, yes.
That's impressive.
Yes, and I presented myself, and I applied for scholarships, and so I pretty much went to college on scholarships.
That's great.
Yes. So
that's unusual.
Yeah.
For a young person to
Yeah.
do.
Well.
That's really amazing.
Yeah, I'm sort of like, proud of having done that, and
Yes,
somehow
should be. And what did you major in college? What were your interests there?
I wanted something that would get me a job.
Yes.
So it was medical technology.
Oh.
I mean, that was a sure future. My love was actually maybe history or social work, but that
wasn't practical.
That wasn't practical. I wasn't able. I mean, I did try taking a couple of courses in that arena, but I could not read fast enough.
Right.
I enrolled
Right.
myself in a fast reading course.
Yeah, speed reading.
Speed
right?
reading,
was
but
very
it didn't
popular.
work. It didn't work for me.
Right.
Didn't work for me. I mean, I love words, and
Yes.
I like taking my time and maybe thinking about what I'm reading.
Right.
And so I mean, I don't, for that reason or whatever reason, I steered towards sciences.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And
and did you meet your husband in New Hampshire, or when did you come
it
to
was
Massachusetts?
it was much later. So I in order to keep sort of like paying for school.
Yes.
I sort of agreed or enrolled in a program at Mary Hitchcock. This in Hanover, New Hampshire, which paid for my last year of college if I would work for an additional year at the Mary Hitchcock Hospital.
Uh-huh.
And my last year was training in the laboratories.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
as a
And they
medical.
paid for you
Yes,
to finish,
yes.
which is great.
So after that was completed, I came to Boston along with some friends who were in the program, and so I worked in bacteriology at Beth Israel Hospital for a while.
Interesting.
And then took a job in, doing research in a laboratory. But it wasn't satisfying in the end. So I returned to school. I went to Wheelock and earned a degree or master's degree in early childhood education.
Great.
And, yes. But then it was difficult to find jobs. This was 1977.
Okay.
And, however, I
Sure.
did get, a position at the Quincy School, as a sort of like a resource coordinator. And I just loved it. Yes.
So you really found your niche.
Yes, and it was all through grants, government grants. So
Right.
People helped me write them, and so I think I remained in that position maybe for a couple of years. Eventually, I worked for the Boston School Volunteers,
Oh,
and I was a coordinator, sort of like enrichment coordinator and coordinator in District 6, which was parts of South Boston and Roxbury and that area.
yes.
When did I meet my husband? It was 1974 at a party. I was into photography also by then, and he was doing photography, and so my husband is Herbert Gish, and he has a PhD in math,
Mm-hmm.
and we have had a very nice life together.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
And where was he from? Was he from this area?
He's from actually Brooklyn,
Okay.
but he'd been living in Boston for quite some time. I mean, he went to Syracuse, then he came to
then
to Harvard. Yes.
Right. So that's how he ended up here.
Yes.
That's
And
wonderful.
he was divorced, or he is divorced,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm proud to have two stepchildren, aside from our own two sons.
Wow.
And one of the stepchildren, Jason Gish, has two daughters who are my grandkids. I'm their
Fabulous.
babcia.
That's wonderful.
And they live here in Newton, so
Oh, how great.
yes,
You
so
get
it
to
has
see
very,
them.
very often. Yes, not so much now because the girls are 11 and 8 and
busy.
busy.
And did
But-
your children grow up here in Newton?
Yes, they did. Yes.
Okay. And what was their experience? I mean, obviously different, but
Very, very, very different. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
so they're true Americans.
They're true Americans, and I'm sort of like sad. Well, it was a practical, not solution, but a practical decision
Yes.
for them to learn English. So I mean, other than some little ballads or whatever in Polish that they can still recite. I did not teach them Polish, and in a way, that's a sad thing. But they, I just did not want to sort of like throw up barricades between them and their father.
Right.
So
Of course.
so
And then
that
also,
that was the
yeah.
decision. But at this point, obviously, they wish that they had that.
They still can learn it.
Yes. Well, Polish.
It's not easy.
Polish is it's not like learning Spanish.
No. It's not Latin based. Did you ever go back to Poland and take them, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I did make like 3 or 4 visits. Before taking them, and we all went to Poland in 2012, so they were
that's
already
pretty recent.
quite grown. And since then, I've been returning pretty much every year. And on some of those trips, my husband has come along. We are planning to for a quick visit later this year in October we're actually going with a group to Italy, but then we'll stop in Poland for a few days.
And you still have family there.
And I still have family, and we stay with the family.
Wow,
yes,
that's wonderful.
So
what's a wonderful childhood memory from being there, since you didn't come here until you were much later?
Yeah.
Much older.
Well, just I suppose being so like surrounded with family members. I mean, my mother and I, my father was in the United States, lived with my grandparents, and two aunts for a while. I mean, this is like a 3-room place, but 4 different sets of family living there.
Sure.
So the kitchen would be the living room. It would be the dining room. It would be the bedroom. For my grandparents.
There too.
Yes, and the chickens would be in and out, of the hallway.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
And
but
yes.
that nice feeling of an extended family.
Yes. And it was just a sort of like a very warm environment. I mean, my grandfather sort of like stepped in, and he was he was not illiterate. His own father had been literate, but he himself
didn't have that chance. Right.
He didn't have that chance.
Right.
But he taught me, to draw a stick figure. He taught me my left from my right, and
very important.
Yes. And when I'm ever confused about that, I place myself in the kitchen, or in that multitask room. And I position myself in a particular way, and I know my right from my left.
It's amazing what you remember. And
yeah,
that's amazing. And when you did come, was the difficulties of being the only one, and the English, and the styles, and the people.
Yeah.
But was America what you expected? You're thinking about it from Poland. Did it end up being what you expected, or different, or what your vision was of what you were going to
just
encounter?
Very confusing more than anything, really. And I mean, it's not something that I wanted to do. I did not want to come to America necessarily.
Right.
I mean, I was 13. I had my eye on a boy in the village, and
Sure.
it was sort of like a first crush or something, and I was sort of like wrapped up in that. But and I had a father who was a stranger. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, right. You didn't know him really.
Yes, and I mean, of course, he wrote, and he sent packages and stuff. But still, you're comfortable, sort of like where you are. I mean, perhaps in the earlier times, there might have been starvation or whatever.
Right.
At the time that I was living, I was provided pretty much with what I needed. I mean, of course, my needs were very, very circumscribed, but that was fine because I didn't know any
it
different.
Was modest,
yes,
and it was fine.
Yes, I mean.
So coming here really must have been very confusing.
It was very confusing. Yes.
Yeah.
And it took a long time to sort of like feel comfortable. And it was actually when I was 27 and I went to Poland for the first time, returned to Poland for the first time, I realized that I had made that transition. I wasn't sure up to then, actually.
Right.
Yes.
You
So,
still thought of that as home in many ways.
I didn't know where I sort of like truly belonged. Yes.
Right.
And I remember going back, and feeling a little sort of put out by the sort of like the hovering of the family. I had gone sort of outgrown that or whatever.
Sure.
And but there, I guess you don't outgrow. I mean, it's not a matter of outgrowing it. I mean, the family is very intently, involved in your life, and
Right.
and so I remember that sort of like grazed me the wrong way. So I knew that I had sort of like gone over the fence.
Yes, yeah, you grew up. It's so interesting. And what did you feel, as far as traditions you've maintained or started new ones with your family?
We
And
pretty much started new ones here. I was fascinated when my now stepsons, my husband
yeah,
is Jewish,
uh-huh.
be went through preparation for their bar mitzvahs. Uh, we had actually it was the Foxes. I'm trying to remember Sharon Fox or Cheryl Fox and Everett Fox.
Oh yes,
Who
he wrote that famous translation.
Yes,
Right,
yes. Well,
right.
this was prior to his to that work of his.
Yes.
They were or Everett Fox worked with. Or no, it was actually his wife who worked with the kids doing the preparation
Oh.
with David and Jason doing the preparation, and Everett actually would meet with the parents, and I would tag along with my. We weren't married at the time,
Right.
uh,
Right.
and I was just fascinated and just sort of like uh, just taken with the sort of um, uh, the sort of the Jewish uh, uh, way of sort of like arguing with God,
Yeah,
and just
right,
sort of like
right. The
standing up to
debates,
God and
the
everything.
debates.
That
Right,
was
right.
that was so unlike the religious tradition that I was brought up in. The
Yeah, yeah.
just subsuming yourself
Right.
to all the
Obedience.
Catholic rules and
Sure,
everything.
sure.
So that was just fascinating to me, and it just really engaged me. I mean, not enough for me to sort of you know what do I want to say? Adopt Judaism
No,
as
no,
such.
you weren't changing
Yes,
teams at that
right.
point.
But so.
But
So
so
we
there
have
were new traditions with
yes,
the
yes. So
family that
yes, so we so at our house we pretty much. I mean, we're not, neither my husband nor I are religious. I ended up not being religious, and but I mean we do you know celebrate some of the traditions, the more significant traditions, and
so you've combined them with your
well,
traditions.
we don't necessarily combine them. I mean, we
Yeah.
in our home here, it's more sort of like some of the Jewish traditions, particularly with the granddaughters coming
Sure.
along. I mean, there's
Sure.
more of a sort of community around that, and situational in part. The some of the Catholic associated traditions. I mean, we do at my sister's in Maine, but it's mostly around food. I mean, we don't
And
go
Christmas
to church.
maybe.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so
So
nice.
yeah, no, I mean, I am lucky to have a very nice life. Yeah.
And you found
So,
Newton to be a welcoming place.
oh my heavens, yes, yeah. I mean, well, particularly once the children arrive, and it's
That's
you take
great.
them, for walks or whatever, for strolls in their little carriages and everything, and you make new friends, and
Yes.
yes, so
And where in Newton are you? What community are you part of, or do you
well,
neighborhood or?
yes, well, uh, a couple of communities now. The gardening community.
Oh, that's
So
great. We're
I'm
the
one of
Garden City, right?
yes, yes, yes. So I'm one of those volunteers who gardens in Newton Center, and here and there around town, and uh, and also I'm very involved in learning Spanish. So for the past many years, it's very slow progress. Unlike when I was learning English,
yeah, sure.
and so there's 3 groupings every week that gets together, for conversation. I'm at the intermediate level, and I just love all the people. So it's a social circle as much as around Spanish.
It's wonderful.
So, yeah. So I'm not sure whether I'm giving you what you're looking for.
No, it's not. It's wonderful that you're sharing all this experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there anything else we haven't covered that you would like to share just about coming to the country, being in Newton, raising children here? Anything you miss about Poland that you didn't find here? It's a long time now. But
it's a long time, and I have lived here for so many years. I mean, what do I miss about Poland? I suppose my family there. I mean, it's an incredible culture. Actually, I mean, Poland has through the ages been more democratic than any other country in Europe. Actually, I'm finding out. Doing reading now. I wasn't aware of that necessarily earlier.
Right.
But it might have been pretty much the nobles, but there was voting, kings in and kings out, which was pretty not true of
right.
of Germany or some of the other countries around. Yeah, so so I'm sort of like proud of that heritage.
That's great.
And but I'm happy to be an American, and I'm happy to be living here.
Yes. When you go back, you can really compare and see where you've come. From where you've gotten to.
Yes. And I'm sad about the conservative bent that Poland is on. It seems to be sweeping the world.
You're
My God!
Now,
right? Oh,
right?
very much so. Yeah, which is, and it's in the last couple of years since.
Right. Were you aware of it when you lived there before, during the 40s? Because there also were. Maybe.
Back it was very much communist.
Later on, right.
Influenced. Well, that. I mean, was I aware of it? I guess I was somewhat aware of what things were. I mean, people were afraid of maybe being some things about people being disclosed to the government. For instance, I remember that there was a radio that the men in my family would sort of listen to. Might have been the whatever free
like Radio Free
Europe, yes, from
during the
England,
era.
yes, and it would be very staticky. It would be hidden in one of in the corner of the house somewhere. So I do remember that, and I remember that that's something that could not be disclosed. I remember when Stalin died, and sort of like the sort of the. I mean, we were students, and certainly the ideas of an alliance with Russia was very much propagated. So there was sort of like a pall that fell among the children, because we're losing this very important person.
So you remember that?
Yeah. So
I made a big impact.
I remember that.
It's amazing.
And, yes.
Right.
And yeah, so.
Okay. Anything else that you want to share? Because I'm sorry, but we're going to have to.
Yeah,
It's
yes,
so
yes,
interesting.
yes.
Really, thank you so much for sharing all
Oh,
this.
um,
Anything we didn't cover that you would like to tell us, or you
well,
would like
I mean,
to?
I've sort of like gone in circles and backtracked and
No,
gone
that's
forward.
life. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether uh, what I've left out. I mean, obviously there's a life,
Of
you know,
course,
of
of course.
experiences.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So.
But that's great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Do you have some photos? Or?
Well, I didn't bring photos as such, but
I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead.
yes. So I brought something that on a recent trip one of my cousins had given to me, and you know, as I mentioned earlier, even though my grandfather was illiterate, my great grandfather was not. He was actually sort of like the sage in the village, and he had some sort of like judicial duties even, and he
Wow.
was he wrote, and he made this box,
Oh, that's
you know, with his
amazing.
name,
How beautiful.
you know, and the year, which was somewhere 1901.
That is
Yeah,
beautiful.
What
so
did he put in the box?
you know, I don't know, maybe tobacco or something like that.
That's beautiful. Very
I
special.
don't know. So it is very special. It is very special. I mean, so he made this,
Oh,
you know, with decorations.
that's beautiful.
And there's a bit written about him in this book.
Oh.
So this is you know, actually a house that I remember, you know,
Amazing.
yes. So there was like, and this is what many of the houses looked like.
Right, the
You know,
thatched roof.
The
and
thatched roof,
Uh-huh.
yes, and sort of like logs, you know, with some sort of material, you know, to in between, you know. But this house belonged to the sister of my grandfather, actually, Lubash.
That's special.
Yeah. So, and so this great grandfather, you know, brought some sort of innovative things to the village. He introduced chimneys.
Really?
Yeah, in our village. That, I mean, imagine,
Yes.
you know, these
Early 1900s. It looks
yes.
like.
So it would
Yeah.
have been perhaps earlier than that, maybe
Yes,
late 1800s or whatever.
Amazing.
So, so anyway, this is in Polish, and
So
and
where
it's
did
sort
you
of,
get the book?
well, that's a story. My cousin's husband, whose actually friend has wrote it, gave it to me, and it caused a little bit of a consternation in the family because this is the only copy that they had,
Oh.
and he parted with it and he gave it to me, and so his daughter, you know, the judge, always sort of like ached over that a little bit. So when we learned that, or when my husband learned that on one of our recent visits, he decided to go on the web to see if he could locate other copies.
Really?
And he was able to locate 2 copies.
Really?
One of them from somewhere in Connecticut, okay, which we sent for,
Unbelievable.
and another one from the Netherlands or Holland.
Really?
And so, yes.
So you were able to get more?
So we were able to get 2 more copies.
That's amazing.
And so we gave one of those copies to this cousin who was hoping to who had wished that her father had preserved it for her,
For sure.
and another one to my cousin's son, who is into, he is actually his career is sort of like refurbishing and not renovating, restoring churches
Oh,
in Poland. So we thought
That's
that you know,
wonderful.
he would be interested.
So it's a history of the
Fabulous.
village?
It's a history of the village,
That is
in
special.
the
Moderówka.
Moderówka is
Moderówka.
how, the Biatkówka has been subsumed into
Yes.
Moderówka.
Those 3 little villages you mentioned.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So
That's
it's
amazing.
yes.
Oh, thank you so
oh my
much for
goodness.
sharing all
Oh,
this.
you're welcome.
Really happy that you were part of this oral history
Oh,
project.
I'm
Thank you
I'm
so much for doing
pleased
that.
to be invited.
And please say hello to Gisela for me.
I will.